So recently, the Edmonds Police Department in Washington State and the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office seemed to think it was a great idea to arrest a guy for collecting signatures in a public park, even though it's explicitly a public location protected for doing exactly that. And it seems like we have all the ingredients for a great First Amendment federal lawsuit against the city of Edmonds and Snohomish County. The guy who was arrested right here, Bruce Guthrie, was actually arrested for gathering signatures to help a Libertarian presidential candidate get on the Washington state ballot at Francis Anderson Playfield during the Edmonds Art Festival on June 14th, which was just a little over a week ago. Now, I'll get into the specifics on why he was right, why the police were wrong, and then how this could be a great federal court case to help remind our political class that the First Amendment still actually exists, even in the city of Edmonds. Now, before I get into this crazy story, however, I want to remind you to like and share this video as well as to subscribe to our channel. It doesn't cost anything except a few seconds of your time, and the more people who see our videos, the more annoyed our political class becomes, and you can help. Okay, so let's just get back to this absurd story from Edmonds. And I must admit, at first, when I heard the story last week, I wanted more details about what happened because it just sounded crazy, even to me, that police would actually bother to arrest someone, particularly in Washington state, who was just out gathering signatures in a public park. Now, keep in mind, the police in Washington, they hardly arrest anyone, even if you burn down stores, take over square blocks of a city in an effort to secede from America, as they did a few years ago in Seattle, or do far worse than just that. With over a century of experience with public signature gathering in Washington state after the state constitution was amended back in 1912, which allowed the initiative process, I would just assume that this was pretty common and recognized First Amendment activity. But it appears that I was wrong to assume that. Now, sure, there have always been disputes about what constitutes a public venue. A variety of lawsuits over this issue have been fought in the courts in the past. Even private venues like Walmart and shopping malls, they've recognized that they can't prevent signature gathering on their premise if they allow any other type of activity there. And I've signed petitions outside stores since I could vote. And I've seen them gathered in public venues since I was a kid. However, apparently in the city of Edmonds, the local police, and more importantly, their leadership, apparently they need a primer on the First Amendment once again. And they certainly screwed up arresting this guy. Now, by the way, there's almost an hour of this type of video here and audio simply documenting his arrest, handcuffing, strip search, and imprisonment. His wife actually had to go bail him out of jail. And in the process of doing this, it looks like a perfect First Amendment lawsuit has been prepped for any semi-competent, marginally literate attorney who actually wants to notch this one on their belt as a win for free speech. Now, I'm particularly interested in this case for two reasons. And first, because I'm acutely aware of the growing efforts of our political class to suppress free speech in our country at every opportunity. Their increasingly rabid and very partisan assault on free speech. Of course, it's only if they disagree with it, of course. That's become exceptionally intense in recent years. Our federal government has been active in creating Orwellian ministries of truth, either openly or in secret, hiring kind of weirdos and crazies like this gal to run these free speech suppression operations. Now, unfortunately, this has also happened in our state of Washington. One of my direct experiences with this was the effort from 4 years ago where our state fenced off part of the state capitol and then threatened to arrest us if we used sound equipment on campus to protest the state's abusive lockdown theater. Governor Inslee or any other non-lefty protester at the time. I mean, it was pretty absurd. My regular viewers from that time, you're going to remember when I organized the Come Commit an Act of Free Speech with Me and Get Arrested event 4 years ago. And you will also remember that I provided advance notice to the state government that I was explicitly planning to come and commit an act of free speech and hold this event in direct violation of their illegal invented rules. And I was openly defying them and encouraging them to go ahead and arrest me for doing so. I also provided them at the time with ample legal precedent that I planned to use in my certain guaranteed lawsuit against them if they did arrest me. Now, at the time, the state backed down right at the last minute, and they admitted that they were wrong, and our free speech rights could continue to be exercised at the state capitol once again, as they had traditionally been exercised for the previous 130 years of statehood. Now, that was cool at the time, and I know some of you joined me in that very rainy day in February, celebrating our right to exercise our free speech rights without threat of arrest over 4 years ago. But last week, this guy, Bruce Guthrie, right here, he was actually arrested for gathering signatures in a public park. A place, by the way, where there is no legal ambiguity about his right to collect signatures. In fact, if you actually read the contract that was signed by the Edmonds Art Festival people to hold their event in the park, they explicitly agreed to allow free speech activities to occur unimpeded during their event, just like every other similar event in the state held in public venues just like this. Now, this leads to my second reason for being so interested in this case, because the right to participate in the initiative process has been under assault lately by the political class in our state, because the recent initiatives have not been favored pet projects supported by the leftists in the state. And therefore, this has been basically encouraged our political class now to change the rules for speech that they don't support. I'm going to point out that one nice thing about body cam videos and squad car videos that I really appreciate is that you can obtain these videos with records requests, which somebody else did in this case. And these videos have now been posted. And now that, of course, you can see Mr. Guthrie was not being obnoxious or abusive in any way and at any time in this whole process. In fact, he shows exceptional restraint, very polite, but also aware of his constitutional free speech rights, which shouldn't surprise anybody who is a libertarian, knowing that that's what he is. Now, by the way, the Linwood Times, I thought, had some pretty detailed and excellent articles about this case, and I've seen some other people now who are starting to cover it as well. And I'll link to some of their stories down below in the video description area so that you can actually go and look at those, as well as the YouTube videos of the arrest videos. These are the original record requests, arrest videos from the police department. You can look at them yourself. But let's review what actually happened here. Bruce Guthrie is a Libertarian candidate for the 21st State Legislative seat, Position 2, which includes the city of Edmonds. He has unsuccessfully attempted to run for office before in the past, including on the Mukilteo School Board, if I remember right. But this is only relevant in the fact that this just demonstrates his willingness to engage in the civic process. He has also been a volunteer signature gatherer, even recently for I-2066, which is the one we've talked about, repealing the natural gas ban that's currently in process right now. But on June 16th, he was not gathering signatures for that initiative. Then instead, he was actually out gathering signatures for the Libertarian candidate for president, and then trying to help others kind of gather these 2,000 signatures to get that guy on the ballot. Now, for minor party candidates, the rule which allows them to be on the ballot in states that it kind of varies state to state. But in Washington, one thing that they have to do is collect 2,000 signatures for this process, and they usually use volunteers to do it. Volunteers just like Bruce. Now, it isn't easy, but usually the Libertarian Party is able to achieve this goal pretty much every time the presidential year comes around. Now, by the way, both major parties, they tend to be annoyed by these minor party candidates because they tend to siphon protest votes away from the major parties. And remember, in Washington state, even though the state has a top two primary system, kind of a jungle primary, this doesn't apply to the presidential race. So there will be multiple options in November for the president's position. So Mr. Guthrie is gathering signatures on Friday, June 14th, with a few other friends of his at the Edmonds Art Festival, just like this, inside this public park, and basically during an event where the organizers themselves clearly signed a contract with the city of Edmonds, as they have for years in the past, explicitly requiring them to allow First Amendment activity in the park during their arts festival. Even though the state constitution and the federal constitution, they don't require this duplicative affirmation of your First Amendment rights. And somebody, probably one of the organizers there, got annoyed that these guys were there gathering signatures at their event for a political cause that the organizers of the arts festival didn't support. So they went and called the police. And the police showed up, and I don't blame them for showing up. And apparently a Snohomish County deputy also showed up, so you had two jurisdictions there. And they asked the signature gatherers to leave and go somewhere else, out on the sidewalk, outside of the park. And most of them actually do just that, just to avoid the hassle of arrest. But Bruce Guthrie apparently knows the law, and certainly better than the police, and his constitutional rights, and he refused to leave. And it appears that he is clearly informing the police at that time that he has a clear constitutional right to gather signatures at the public park. And this is where the critical abuse of his constitutional rights really began. Now, the officers on the call apparently confirmed with their superiors that they could arrest Mr. Guthrie, and they did just that. And what they should have done is just walked away and dealt with real crime somewhere else. But their leadership, probably responding to whatever political pressure is being exerted on them at the time, they directed these officers to arrest the annoying signature gatherer, Mr. Guthrie. Now, the police put him in handcuffs. They drove him to the police station, strip searched him, and then they booked Mr. Guthrie into jail for 6 hours before his wife finally had the opportunity to come out and then bail him out. Now, at the time that I'm recording this video, to the best of my knowledge, the county prosecutor still has not dropped the stupid charges against Mr. Guthrie, but this really does look like a perfectly prepped and prepared First Amendment case, from what I can see. Even though this clearly is a violation of both federal and state constitutional protections, I would encourage an attorney to take this up in federal court due to the almost total basically the complete corruption of the state Supreme Court and their clear political subservience to the political powers who basically have appointed them. Washington State Supreme Court has historically actually been very favorable towards First Amendment cases, but the political corruption of the court in recent years, vividly on display in many recent decisions, this clearly shows the state Supreme Court is not a venue for constitutional protections at this time, unfortunately. Now, additionally, there are actually 2 Ninth Circuit federal cases that are just, and this is just a few of actually quite a few different examples, which are very similar in this fact pattern and that we just saw in Edmonds. And in these are both cases where the respective cities or counties have lost their efforts to silence free speech pretty decisively. And I'll actually link to these court cases down below so you can go read them for yourself. But they were both referenced in the Linwood Times article on the story, and specifically the Guthrie versus City of Portland case from 2006 and the Guthrie versus County of Maui from 2015. Now, assuming Guthrie moves forward with this lawsuit, and I suspect it's going to become Guthrie versus City of Edmonds or maybe Snohomish County, and then the fact pattern, from what I can tell, looks like a pretty solid slam dunk First Amendment case. Now, I don't like wasting legal resources with the police departments when they need to be actually out there spending their time and our tax dollars actually prosecuting real criminals. They have plenty of them. But when the local law enforcement, and more critically, their commanding officers, can't figure out something as simple as the First Amendment, we've only been collecting signatures in public parks just like this for about 115 years now. It's very necessary to prosecute cases just like this one for the education of our elected officials and paid government employees, if for no other reason. Now, I strongly suggest if there is a settlement agreement that comes out of this, and my guess is they're going to rapidly be trying to do that, it needs to be made super public and unambiguous that the city and the county were in the wrong. This needs to include all the elected officials in the city, the employees in the respective police departments, and the elected county officials like the county prosecutor and sheriff. They need to be required to not just publicly apologize in writing and at a publicly recorded public press conference to Mr. Guthrie. They should also be required to take training in both the federal and the state constitution in regards to First Amendment rights and protections of the citizens who live there, because clearly they don't understand it. Now, most people don't desire to be arrested, handcuffed, strip searched, and jailed. But when the police and government lose sight of what they're doing and they can't remember that we have constitutional protections, sometimes it's worth standing up for your rights respectfully, as Mr. Guthrie appears to have done here, so that these entities can be reminded who they actually work for. Running away is not going to fix this. Burying your head in the sand is not going to fix this. However, nipping the abuse in the bud and ensuring that the penalties for abusing Mr. Guthrie's free speech rights are high enough and embarrassing enough to discourage repeating this behavior by not just these guys, but any other government agencies in the future, it's well worth pursuing. It's actually hard to imagine a better fact pattern for this type of case. Thank you, City of Edmonds. Now, I'm not aware that Mr. Guthrie has an attorney yet, but it seems certain that he's going to have one, or certainly a few of them, before this week's out. Since he isn't clearly aligned with left-leaning crazies trying to burn the city down or maybe attempting to seize blocks of Seattle or glue themselves to the pavement, he might actually have fewer attorneys willing to represent him. But there are probably some left out there who still believe in the First Amendment. Now, one thing we can remember from this case, and I think it's important, you really only have an impact if you show up and engage. Mr. Guthrie may not be too happy about what happened to him, and we should be angry and disappointed by this as well. But if the end result helps remind and restore those of us the exercise of our freedoms, then at least there's going to be some good that's going to come from this dumb situation. However, I believe this is just another reminder that if you want to make a difference, you can't do so in silence, stewing at home, or posting angry comments on Facebook. Sometimes you actually do have to show up, even if it is just in a park to collect signatures, because in the end, the future belongs to those who show up.